I decided to make a new mallet, and I've had this wood is good mallet for several years, and it's been decent, but it has one major flaw, and that is having a round head, it rolls right off the bench really easy. So since I liked the dimensions and the basic shape of that mallet, I took some measurements and copied those over to a 16-quarter piece of ash that I picked up. In making this mallet, I wanted to make one major adjustment from the original, and that is, instead of it being perfectly round at the top and then slowly tapering towards the middle, I drew a straight line through part of the diameter that would make up the head, and I cut that off on the bandsaw and then cleaned it up on the jointer. But the reason for that is so that when I am done turning the mallet, there will be a flat face on a portion of it. The idea being that if I just drop the mallet on its side, it'll roll until it gets to the flat face, and then it'll stop and hopefully not roll off of the bench. After I had that part cut off, I also struck lines to go from the maximum diameter of the mallet head down to the diameter of the knob at the bottom of the handle, and then I sawed those off on the bandsaw, just so that there would be less wood to remove at the lathe. I also marked the centers on this blank prior to any of the cutting at the bandsaw so that they would already be in place and I wouldn't have to try to measure those out later. I started with the roughing gouge to get it close to the general shape that I wanted. I gave it a similar taper as the original mallet, but I made it slightly rounded outwards towards the face. After the roughing gouge, I switched over to my Easy Wood Tools finisher. To smooth it down and get it right where I wanted. I tried adding a couple pinstripes that I painted with enamel, but I really hated how they turned out, so I ended up cutting those out. Which actually turned out good because the small adjustments I made to the handle by shaving off the pinstripes actually made the handle feel a lot better. Then of course there was a lot of sanding. And more sanding. I think by the end I had taken it up to about 400 grit. I then used some tried and true Danish oil. Which was really thick given how cold my shop is right now. After slathering on a coat of that, I let it sit for about 5 minutes, wiped off the excess, and then let it dry overnight. I like tried and true Danish oil. The only problem is the yellowing that it applies to the wood, which for most woods doesn't matter, but for ash, I like the normal, very light, almost white color that it has. The Danish oil makes it look almost like an oak. I ended up giving it 3 coats. Once the last coat of Danish oil was dry, I mounted the mallet back on the lathe and spun it with some quadruple-aught steel wool, followed by a cloth with some Johnson's paste wax. It doesn't really need the wax, and wax isn't a very protective finish. I just like the look that it gives and the feel. So I burnished in a generous coat of wax over the entire mallet. And it's ready to use. After testing out the mallet and seeing how it worked with a gouge, which it worked pretty well I might add, the next test was to see, is it going to roll off my bench? And it actually seems to find that flat face fairly easily, and I never had it roll off the bench. Actually, this was the end of my table saw, but it would be the same with the bench. Thanks for watching.